The men who came back from Vietnam, our military men, who came back not only to the absence of parades and celebration of their service, but sometimes to heckles and jeers. We are going to fix that because that's not America. That is part of the warrior ethos in the 21st century. I reject out of hand that reflecting the country has to include mutilating the human person. If you're a young man or woman thinking about serving in America's military, don't you believe it's going to be more likely that you will actually join if you see this kind of reform, the zealous focus on being the most lethal, efficient force in the world?
Welcome to the Kevin Roberts Show. I'm Larry O'Connor, and this episode we're tackling one of the most important American institutions from our founding, from before our founding, the warrior ethos, Dewoking the military. The United States military has been part of America's heritage since its beginning, and, well, in recent years, up until very recently, we've seen a change in how our military is commanded, how it's instituted even, and the kind of warriors that we've been training and putting out to represent our nation in uniform. What happened? How did we get here? And how can we fix it? Kevin, people see drag shows on bases. They see more DEI instruction going on than training on firearms, and they wonder, how the heck did we get here? How did we get here?
Well, we allowed the left to take over our institutions. I mean, and as we start this conversation, Larry, much has improved in the year 2025. So for our friends in the administration, keep doing what you're doing. Secretary Pete Hegseth, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, but one election, everything blows up
exactly.
Again.
Even if we would look at the midterms, if for some reason the radical left were to take control of either chamber or both, it would make it very difficult for the administration to continue the corrective action they've taken. But back to your question, how did we get here? We got here because those of us on the right who should have known better allowed the left to, as Antonio Gramsci predicted in the 1930s, march through the institutions, our K-12 schools, our universities, but also the military. Yeah. And then what happened is, during the 3 terms of Barack Obama, see what I did there?
Yes.
2 terms of Obama and the 1 year of the auto pen, the 1 term of the auto pen, they actually codified all of that, such that it was more important to kneel to the rainbow flag, and even worse than it was to actually train the most lethal military in the history of the world, which is the job of the Pentagon.
Did conservatives also get kind of complacent? We just always assume the military, these are our guys, and, you know, we share so many common values that there's no way they're going to ruin the military, because it happened so fast.
Completely. But look, I will just say I told you so.
Go ahead. It's your show.
I try not to do that. But in whatever year it was, that is in the Obama years, that the United States government said, we're going to start paying for gender modification surgery. That should have been the sign to complacent people on the right, also known as the Uniparty, that's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to do it for people in prison. It's unacceptable to do in the military. We're correcting all of that.
Yeah, I noticed an insidious thing that happened, though, during that era, in all 3 terms. They rationalized a lot of these things by saying, well, listen, recruitment is down, so we got to open up the military to new communities, people who haven't been represented. Is that really what was behind it? Because it seems to me recruitment was down because people who would normally sign up for the military refused to join that organization because of the choices they were making.
It's a heck of a thing. Recruitment was down. In fact, it was declining precipitously as more and more of that nonsense was being instituted. But I will have to make this observation. You know that as I offer critiques of the left, I also try to offer critiques of the right. And sometimes those are self-reflective, either of myself or even of heritage and the conservative movement. And it's this, that we made it easier for them to use that excuse because of the adventurous wars that never ended around the world. You know, I've referred to myself as a recovering neocon. Had we not done that, which also led to a diminishment in recruiting, because potential service members are asking the question, what am I actually fighting for? What is the strategy behind this war? You actually had a couple of things dovetail, a couple of trends dovetail that created this mess. But ultimately, by correcting the overreach of the left, we have seen the fruits, which is that there is a spike in recruitment right now.
Yeah. Again, it's important to point out that the last few months we've seen a 180 on this, but we got to address the issue, the underlying issue here. Now, my friends on the left, and I do have friends on the left. Do you have any friends on the left?
I have 3 remaining friends.
Is that right? You can count them literally on one
I was
hand.
challenged recently by another friend. Count the number of friends on the left you have. I have 3.
All right. Well, I have a few more, but they'll tell me that, listen, our military should reflect our country. And your opposition to all of these DEI initiatives to expand recruitment and have our military look like America's makeup, it's just like people who are against racial integration in the military and against bringing women into the military. Do they have a point?
No.
That was easy. All right, moving on.
Well, but I'll say 2 things. The first is the job of the military is not to reflect the country. The job of the military is to protect national interests and Americans, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And if, in fact, it were possible to do that and have a 100% transgender military, then we would have that. But in fact, that's not how you do that. But the second thing I would say is, even if I were to concede that some institutions should reflect America, it shouldn't include things that harm the human person. So very politely to your friends on the left and to mine, I reject out of hand that reflecting the country has to include mutilating the human person.
Fair enough. What about the idea that we should be blind to all of those other aspects? Doesn't matter what alphabet you belong to or who you go to bed with. If you're a good warrior and you can hit the standards, that's all that matters. Is that true, or is there an issue with cohesiveness and some of the other concerns that you wrote?
There is such a huge difference between respecting immutable characteristics such as our ethnic and racial backgrounds and the beauty of America's pluralism and having people of all backgrounds who also want to serve in our military, and things that you do to change your body, to believe that you're born a woman and want to be a man or vice versa. So it actually undermines the beautiful progress we've made in this country to have real justice for people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds by equating that with what really is something that is a mental disorder.
All right, Kevin, we come here for your clear-headed explanations of what's going on in our country, our culture, our government, but we stay for your history lessons.
Are you sure about that?
Let's go to the history for a second. Vietnam era, I think, is probably a good time to pick from. The tumultuous aftermath of the Vietnam War, the draft dodging, the perception that our military was sort of the people who couldn't get out of the draft or weren't going to college, and just sort of did that contribute, I think, the post-Vietnam era and then Reagan's ability to bring the military back up to its high standards? What was that all about?
Oh, it's significantly. You know, a couple of minutes ago, I referenced the neoconservative, adventurous, never-ending wars of the early 21st century. Well, really, the first indication of that was the Vietnam conflict, which in no way is to take away the heroic sacrifices, particularly of those men who gave the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of America and freedom. But it is to say that for the policymakers in Washington, Republican and Democrat alike, and leaders of the Pentagon, there was never a clear indication, there was never a clear articulation of what victory looked like. Yes, defeating communism, that's the sort of overarching goal, but we were specific, we were even haphazard, especially going from the LBJ to Nixon administrations about what that victorious strategy would be. Therefore, when Reagan took office in 1980, actually as he was running up in this crescendo to win the 1980 election, it was driven in part by something he said routinely on the campaign trail in 1979 and 80. And that was the men who came back from Vietnam, our military men, who came back not only to the absence of parades and celebration of their service, but sometimes to heckles and jeers. We are going to fix that because that's not America. That is part of the warrior ethos in the 21st century.
You remind me, when Reagan had his inauguration, he shifted tradition and was sworn in on the other side of the Capitol building facing Arlington Cemetery. There was a reason for that. He not just wanted the American people to hear that message, but he also wanted to make sure all those members of Congress sitting on the stage would always look down the mall and see those tombstones as a reminder of the responsibility they have, right?
It's true, and it was profound, and for people who were alive then who understood just the utter evil, the injustice of not celebrating men, even if you didn't support the war itself,
right, to
celebrate our servicemen and now servicewomen who are taking this sacrifice and ultimately willing to pay with their lives. We can never do that in the United States. But it also reminds me of a story a then backbencher in the Republican conference in the House told me. His name is Newt Gingrich.
Ah, yeah,
which
that
is
guy.
That when Ronald Reagan said that, Newt's response, being a policy guy, he and I were having this conversation recently, was we need to turn the Pentagon into a triangle. Meaning there's a lot of bloat there that gets in the way of the warrior ethos. There are a lot of great men and women inside the Pentagon, but some of the policymakers who aren't keeping a focus on clear strategy. Now, my complaint is, until the Trump administration this time, on spending money on the munitions programs for tomorrow's war as opposed to yesterday's war. This is part of actually encouraging rank and file men and women to be recruited into the armed services.
Well, I'm a big fan of the Trinity, but I think the Pentagon is still sort of good the way it is. I like those five sides. But let's talk about the bloat there, because a lot of critics will say, especially small government libertarian types who aren't a fan of the size that the military has grown to, that's really the big problem. We've lost our warrior ethos there in the military because it's all about budgets, big spending, the military-industrial complex, and all of these big toys. And lost in all of that budget, lost in the accountability there is the actual service members. Do they have a point?
They do have a point. And they have a point, especially as it relates to how we are making decisions in Congress and at the administrative level in the Pentagon on what we spend our money on. And now it's being driven, up until this point, it's being driven by the political interests of U.S. House members. This is a bipartisan problem. And look, there's part of this that's natural and understandable, but what is great about the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Hegseth is that we're beginning to reform that process such that dynamic, along with the other dynamic, which is a duopoly of Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, which is totally dominating these, they can have their munitions programs that actually will win the next war. We need some of the small businesses, the new entrants, the real innovative disruptors whose material our servicemen and women want to use in a potential next war to actually have a seat at the table. This is all beginning to happen, and we ought to celebrate that. It all comes back to the premise of your question, which is that if you're a young man or woman thinking about serving in America's military, don't you believe it's going to be more likely that you will actually join if you see this kind of reform, the zealous focus on being the most lethal, efficient force in the world?
I was looking back at some of our first few episodes. You were pretty hard on the libertarian type, so you just threw them a bone. You just said they had a point. That's good. This is good. You're growing.
Occasionally, I'm told that I'm a nice guy.
Listen, you get around a lot, too. And one thing I like about the way you conduct yourself is that you're traveling all the time and you're meeting Americans. You're meeting people. When you meet people in the military, when they can sort of look side to side and say, let me tell you, what do they make of what happened in the military up until this administration? I mean, they weren't buying into any of this stuff, right?
No, they really weren't. I do have the privilege of talking to everyday Americans every day. And in my travels, especially leading up to the election last year, in a very nonpartisan way, but speaking about their own service, what motivated them to join the military, almost to the person, those men and women said that they were actively discouraging their own kids from joining the military, from making the decision they did, which was life-changing in a positive way for these people who've mentioned this. We're talking dozens, if not a few hundred of these people who've mentioned this. And then as I've talked to some of the same people, but also some different people from the same walk of life this year, there's a spring in their step. And it may be that they really like Donald Trump as a person, but it's not a partisan thing. It's not as if that they said, okay, life is better because we have a capital R Republican in the White House. They're saying there is such common sense in the leadership by the president, by the Secretary of War, which is awesome that we're saying that, that there's a real focus on what the military's job is, which is to actually defeat our adversaries. God forbid we ever have to go into war again, but we darn well better be prepared to do so.
Well, that's part of the point, though, isn't it? By having that foothold and that stance of we're a War Department, and if you mess with us, we're going to crush you. The whole point is you never get tested, right? That you've got to project that.
Yeah, sometimes some of the uniparty K Street lobbyist types like to use Reagan's wonderful phrase, which Heritage helped popularize, peace through strength, as some sort of strange cudgel against us who want the Pentagon to be efficient and lethal and believe that those two things are not mutually exclusive. Peace through strength is being so strong with so little DEI nonsense and such a focus on the warrior ethos that no one, not the Soviets and now not the CCP, would dare mess with us.
Maybe y'all should rebrand it instead of leading with peace and say, strength will bring us peace.
We might have just had the birth of a great idea, Larry.
Because they want to talk about peace. You talked about the veterans, and this reminded me, I did want to bring this up. You know, I love the movie Forrest Gump. I'm a weirdo. I think it's a great American movie. And there's that great scene of Gary Sinise's character, Lieutenant Dan, that shows his dad and his grandfather and his great-grandfather. They all fought in the military and fought in great wars all the way through. And it's like a really cool thing. But that is how America has been. There are certain regions of this country, and it is very regional, where you have multi-generations of people who have fought in the military. And we reached a point over the course of the last 10 years where they were recommending to their own children, yeah, it ends with me. I don't want you to be a part of this military. How quickly can that turn around? How quickly can we instill that confidence in these families? Because it's a big deal to encourage your child to put on that uniform and potentially put their lives on the line for our nation.
It is a big deal, and it's a huge problem when you have the fourth or fifth generation of a family who served in the military telling the next generation, their own children, don't do what I did and what your grandparents did. It's as if saying, we're changing our family surname. I mean, it's that big a deal. And I thought the night that Trump and Vance won last year's election that we would be able to fix this problem as a country, but that it would take much longer. It's changing already. I mean, there's still a lot of things, Larry, whether, you know, on this topic of the military, defense generally, some other issues, where we still have a lot to fix. But I think it's really important on this particular point that we recognize that we're winning. We're winning because of good policy. We're winning because of the courage of the president and the war secretary in this. But most of all, we're winning because of the steadfastness of all of those men and women who, in spite of all of the nonsense in America's military in the last 10 or 20 years, have said, this country, this military is still worth fighting for.
You know, we have a really diverse audience. Can I use the word diverse?
You can, in its proper context.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned e pluribus unum. There's nothing more e pluribus unum than everybody setting aside their wardrobes to put on a uniform. Means something, right? It means this uniformity, not just of appearance, but also of a common goal and a common mission. All right, so we have a diverse audience, and there's a lot of young people, for some reason, who enjoy watching you and who enjoy hearing you talk about these things. If you could talk to a young person today, someone watching us or listening to us right now, and they're considering joining the military, why should they?
I've always encouraged that with students, younger people who see me as a mentor, our own children. And what I say is you can never give back to this country what it gives to us each day. And the greatest way to serve the country, if you're so called, is to serve in uniform. And whether you serve in uniform, although we certainly have encouraged our own children and the young people around us, think about your avocation in this world as an American, regardless of where your people are from, whether they came to the United States voluntarily or involuntarily, as the greatest experiment, not just in freedom, but in self-governance and human flourishing in the history of the world. And that, in spite of the fact that we are the most diverse, we are the most pluralistic people in the history of any civil society, we ought to have the greatest military ever. And what I know from my friends and family who've served in uniform is it is the thing that gives them the spring in their step well after their service comes to a conclusion.
Well, to all the members of the military and to their spouses and to their children and to their parents, we thank you for your service, and to you veterans as well. Thank you. We never forget you. We appreciate you watching. And while you're there, if we could just ask one more thing, it's not nearly as drastic as joining the military and putting your life on the line. It's just a like on the episode you're watching right now, a thumbs up, and maybe a subscribe so you don't miss another episode. We really appreciate it. That's it for the Kevin Roberts Show. We'll be back next time.